In lesson 1 of this unit, we discussed factoring the greatest common factor, and also we discussed factoring by grouping. Today we will see how to factor a trinomial expression. Well, I'm sure you know what a trinomial expression is. Let's look at a trinomial expression. 3x squared minus 7x plus 2 is a trinomial expression. Well, can we write this as the product of two or more polynomials? What does factoring a trinomial means? We need to write this expression as the product of two or more polynomials. Is it possible to do that? Well, let us consider the product of two polynomial functions. Now, 3x minus 1 times x minus 2. Can you multiply these two binomials? Now, how do we multiply these two binomials? Recall the method we developed. 3x multiplied by x will be 3x squared. Then 3x multiplied by negative 2 will be negative 6x. Finish multiplying by 3x. Now multiply by negative 1. Negative 1 multiplied by x is negative x. And negative 1 multiplied by negative 2 will be positive 2. Let's write that down. So that will be 3x multiplied by x minus 2 minus 1 multiplied by x minus 2. Alright, let's multiply. 3x multiplied by x is 3x squared. 3x multiplied by negative 2 is minus 6x. Minus 1 times x is minus x. And minus 1 times negative 2 is positive 2. Now combine the middle terms. You get this is 3x squared minus 7x plus 2. Well, what does that mean? Multiplying two polynomials, 3x minus 1 times x minus 2, gives you this trinomial. It means these 3x minus 1 and x minus 2 are the factors of this trinomial. There you are. So this means that 3x squared minus 7x plus 2 can be written as the product of two binomials, 3x minus 1 times x minus 2, and these are called the factors of the trinomial. Now, our task in this lesson is to learn how to start with a trinomial like this and how to factor it in this form, the product of two binomials. Alright, we're going to develop a method for doing this in this lesson. Let us develop a method for factoring trinomials. And we will start with the one that we have already used, 3x squared minus 7x plus 2. And you can see I have used three colors for that trinomial. A trinomial has three terms. 3x squared is the first term of the polynomial. Plus 2 is the last term, and negative 7x is the middle term. I want you to sort of get familiarized with these terms. So a trinomial has a first term, a last term, and a middle term. 3x squared is the first term here. Positive 2, what's the sign? It's very important. Positive 2 is the last term, and negative 7x is the middle term. Alright, where do we start when you want to factor a trinomial like this? Step 1, factor the first term. Now, how do we factor 3x squared? Can you factor 3x squared? There is only one way to do that. Well, there are actually a couple of ways, but one very obvious way is 3x squared can be factored as 3x multiplied by x. What is another way to factor 3x squared? Well, 3x squared can be factored as 3x squared times 1. Any number can be factored as the number multiplied by 1. Well, that is a possibility. But this is the most common way we can factor 3x squared. So 3x squared is factored as 3x multiplied by x. Now, in this step 1, watch this carefully. Write these factors side by side with good space between them. I'm going to develop a method that you can follow in factoring any trinomial. Try and follow this method. So 3x and x are the two factors of the first term 3x squared. Write them side by side like this. Alright, what is step 2? Step 2 is factor the last term. What is the last term we have? Positive 2. Can you factor that positive 2 for me? Now you would tell me, well, 2 is a prime number, we cannot factor it. But remember, any number can be factored as that number multiplied by 1. So what is one way to factor positive 2? Positive 2 can be factored as positive 2 times positive 1. Now, positive 2 can also be factored as negative 2 times negative 1. Is that right? Yes, because, watch this. Now, a negative number multiplied by a negative number is a positive number. So, negative 2 multiplied by negative 1 is positive 2. That means there are two very obvious ways to factor that positive 2. What are they? Positive 2 times positive 1 is one way to factor it. Negative 2 times negative 1 is also a way of factoring positive 2. Okay, let's talk about this further. Factor the last term. Positive 2 can be factored in two ways. Positive 2 equal to positive 2 times positive 1. That will be 2. Also, positive 2 is negative 2 times negative 1. Two ways to factor that last term. Now, when you have several ways of factoring the last term, how do you know which one to go for? There's a rule that we're going to follow. Now look at the rule. If the last term is positive and the middle term is negative, this is the guiding principle. If the last term is positive and the middle term is negative, then both factors of the last term should be negative. Okay, and therefore, what are the factors of this positive 2 for us in this case? Our last term is positive and the middle term is negative. Therefore, you must factor this positive 2 as two negative factors. That means we must choose this, positive 2 equal to negative 2 times negative 1. Alright, so we have now done two things in factoring this expression. What are the two things we did? We first factored the first term. 3x squared is factored as 3x times x. Then we factored the last term. we factored positive 2 as negative 2 times negative 1. And look at the way I'm going to organize it. Write negative 2 below x and negative 1 below 3x. I wrote the negative 2 below x and the negative 1 below 3x. Now, how do you know where to write this? Now, this can be done only by trial and error, and that is the reason why I want you to practice this diagram method. In practice, this is done by trial and error. In other words, how do you know if this negative 2 is not written here? You see, the position can change. Well, we're going to talk about this and develop this method. So pay attention very carefully and learn it. Now, we need to perform a test. How do we know whether we have placed these factors in their proper positions? And the test is done like this. Multiply diagonally or cross multiply. In other words, multiply negative 2 with 3x and negative 1 with x. What is negative 2 multiplied by 3x? Negative 2 multiplied by 3x is negative 6x. What is negative 1 multiplied by x? Is negative x. Alright? What do you get if you add these two products? Adding these two gives, what do you get if you add negative 6x to negative x? You get negative 7x. Now, do you recognize this negative 7x? That negative 7x is the middle term of our polynomial. If you remember our polynomial, this is our polynomial. It is 3x squared minus 7x plus 2 is our polynomial. So, what is the test that you got to do here? Once you factor the first term and then the second term and write them like this, multiply diagonally. Negative 2 multiplied by 3x is negative 6x. And negative 1 multiplied by x is negative x. And adding the 2 must give you the middle term. If adding the 2 does not give you the middle term, that means you have not placed these numbers in their proper position. You need to then change and experiment, do trial and error. Now, you do it until the test is passed. What is the test? Multiply diagonally and add. You must get the middle term. Now, once the test is done, how do we pick our factors? Now, multiplying diagonally and adding should give the middle term. This is your test. Always make sure that this test is done. What is the test? After factoring the first term and writing the factors side by side, and then after factoring the last term and writing them also side by side below the factors of the first term, multiply diagonally and add. That must give you the middle term. Now, once you get that, these are written now in the proper form. Once the test is done, group the terms vertically for the factors. That means your first factor is this. Look at the way I'm going to factor it. 3x minus 1. 3x minus 1 is your first factor. And the second factor is x minus 2. So, once the test is done, your factors are picked vertically. 3x minus 1 is the first factor. and x minus 2 is the second factor. That means our polynomial now is factored. We have identified both factors. Okay? I know it's a little tricky in the beginning, but it's going to get better as we go on. So make sure that you practice every time we do a new problem. Now, that means the trickiest part is to factor the last term. And so I'm going to give you some rules to determine the sign of the factors of the last term. Now, what are the rules? We talked about one rule already. If the last term is positive and the middle term is negative, then both factors of the last term should be negative. You see, for example, in the case that we just did, 3x squared minus 7x plus 2, the last term is positive and the middle term is negative. That means both the factors of positive 2 must be negative. Alright, let's now look at another one. The second rule, if the last term is positive and the middle term is also positive, then both factors of the term should be positive. For example, if our trinomial were like this, 3x squared plus 7x plus 2. Now, the last term is positive and the middle term is also positive. Now, this means both the factors of your last term should be positive. Alright, can we practice using this or how to factor this? Now, factor the first term, 3x squared. Can you factor the first term? 3x squared is 3x times 3x. So I wrote 3x and x side by side. Alright, how do we factor the last term? Positive 2 is factored as positive 2 times positive 1. The last term is positive, the middle term also is positive. That means both the factors of this number must be positive. So I'm going to write it as positive 2 and positive 1. Now, you notice I wrote the 2 below x because I know that is where it is going to fit in. Alright, and positive 1 below 3x. And now what do? Multiply diagonally. In other words, multiply positive 2 with 3x. What do you get? 3x times 2 is positive 6x. And then multiply 1 by x. 1 multiplied by x equal to x. And adding gives you 7x. So 6x added to x is 7x. That is the middle term. Multiplying diagonally and adding must give you the middle term. Now, once that is satisfied, how do you pick your factors? Your factors are picked vertically. The first factor is 3x plus 1 and the second factor is x plus 2. Okay, so I gave you 2 rules to determine the sign of the factors of the last term. What happens if the last term is negative? Well, if the last term is negative, then you remember only if you multiply a positive number with a negative number, you will get a negative number. So, if the last term is negative, one factor must be positive and the other must be negative. It's very important to know that. Now, for example, if I have this expression, let's see. Now, if I have a 3x squared plus 6x minus 2, I have the last term negative and the middle term is positive. Well, the last term is negative. How do you factor a negative 2? You see, a negative 2 can be factored as negative 2 equal to positive 2 multiplied by negative 1. Also, I can factor it as negative 2 multiplied by positive 1. Now, so a negative 2, when the last term is negative, then one factor must be positive and the other negative. So negative 2 can be factored in two ways. It can be factored as positive 2 times negative 1. Also, it can be factored as negative 2 times positive 1. We will be discussing all these details as we go on. But at the moment you learn this. If the last term is negative, then one factor must be positive and the other must be negative. Okay. Let's now practice using these in factoring trinomials. Let's start with this. Factor a squared minus 2a minus 15. Alright, look at this and try and see if you can remember everything we talked about so far. A squared is the first term. Negative 15 is the last term. And negative 2a is the middle term. Okay, what is the first step in factoring? The first step is factor the first term. How do we factor a squared? Well, there's only one way to do that. A squared is a times a. There you are. A times a. What do you do with them? Write them side by side with some space between them. This is for the purpose of doing our test. Okay. Now factor the last term. The last term is negative. A negative number can only be factored as a positive number times a negative number. Now, can you factor that for me? Negative 15. You can see, I can factor it as negative 5 times positive 3 or positive 5 times negative 3. There are two choices. Alright, which one do we choose? Now, let's write that down for you. Negative 15 can be factored as positive 5 times negative 3 or negative 5 times positive 3. Well, you see, it's very easy to determine which is our choice. Now, the decision is made by looking at the middle term. Look at the middle term. The middle term is negative 2a. Now, if you add positive 5 to negative 3, you only get a positive 2. But negative 5 added to positive 3 is going to be a negative 2. So in this case, our choice are negative 5 and positive 3. And what is the guiding principle for doing this? The middle term. Keep that middle term in your mind. Okay, so we factor negative 15 as negative 5 times positive 3. Alright? So, write this negative 5 and positive 3 below a. That's negative 5 and this is positive 3. What do? Do your test. What is the test? Multiply diagonally, alright, positive 3 times a is positive 3a, and negative 5 times a is negative 5a. And what do you get if you add them together? Adding them give you 3a added to negative 5a is negative 2a. There we have the middle term. This is the middle term of our trinomial. So multiplying diagonally and adding must give you the middle term. On the other hand, if you had used positive 5 and negative 3, you will not get the negative 2a by adding them. You see that? So use this kind of diagram always to test your factoring. Now we got the middle term. That means we have placed them all in their proper positions. How do we pick our factors? Factors are picked vertically. What is the first factor? Our first factor is a minus 5. Our second factor is a plus 3. Alright? The first factor is a minus 5, and the second factor is a plus 3. Therefore, our trinomial a squared minus 2a minus 15 is factored as a minus 5 times a plus 3. If you multiply these out, you will get that trinomial. Yes, try it out. Okay, let's do another one. Factor y squared minus 9y plus 20. You see, when you factor with the first term, the coefficient of the first term is 1, is that right? 1y squared. That makes it very easy for us to factor. And when you look at this, the middle term is negative, the last term is positive. Now, what is the rule for factoring the last term we discussed? The rule for factoring the last term is, if the last term is positive and the middle term is negative, then both factors of the last term must be negative. Now, in here, you simply ask this question: what two numbers will multiply to give you positive 20 and add to give you negative 9? Can you find two numbers when multiplied will give you positive 20 and when added give you negative 9? It's very simple. Negative 5 and negative 4. You see, negative 5 multiplied by negative 4 is positive 20, and negative 5 added to negative 4 is negative 9. Now that is the way to think. Alright, how do we start this? Factor the first term. Y squared can be factored only one way. Y squared equal to y times y. Write them side by side as usual. Now factor the last term, positive 20. The last term is positive and the middle term is negative. That means both the factors of positive 20 must be negative. Alright? So both factors should be negative. That means positive 20 equal to negative 5 times negative 4. That choice is very obvious because negative 5 multiplied by negative 4 gives you positive 20. And negative 5 added to negative 4 gives you negative 9. So write these factors below here, negative 5 and negative 4. What is the next step? Multiply diagonally. Negative 4 times y is negative 4y. Negative 5 times y is negative 5y. Now what do? After multiplying diagonally, add them. What do you get if you add negative 4y added to negative 5y is negative 9y. And that negative 9y is our middle term, and therefore the test is good. That means all these are placed in their proper positions. Now once they are all placed in their proper positions, how do you pick your factors? Pick your factors vertically. The first factor is y minus 5. Y minus 5 is the first factor. And the second factor is y minus 4. Now look at the sign. This is negative 5. Y minus 5 is the first factor. Y minus 4 is the second factor. And therefore, this polynomial y squared minus 9y plus 20 is factored as y minus 5 times y minus 4. Now, is it getting easier? Well, let's do another one. Factor r squared plus 22r plus 121. Well, you notice that the last term is positive, the middle term also is positive. So what can you say about the factors of the last term? Both factors of the last term must be positive. Alright, how many of you know how to factor 121? Actually, you can only do it one way. 121 is 11 multiplied by 11. 11 times 11 is 121. And what you get if you add them? 11 plus 11 is 22. See, look how neatly it fits in. Okay, factor the first term at the beginning. R squared can be factored only as r times r. Write these side by side, r and r. And now factor the last term. How do we factor that last term? The last term is positive and the middle term is also positive. That means both factors must be positive. And 121, positive 121 is positive 11 times positive 11. Now use that sign as a guiding principle. And what do we do with these factors? Write them below r and r. And now multiply diagonally. What do you get? 11 times r is positive 11r. The second 11 times r is again positive 11r. And now add them together. Adding them gives you 22r. And 22r is your middle term. Now what does that tell you? It tells you that these are placed in their proper positions. Your factors are therefore picked vertically. How do you now pick your factors? The first factor is r plus 11. R plus 11 is the first factor. What is the second factor? The second factor also is r plus 11. And therefore, r squared plus 22r plus 121 is factored as r plus 11 times r plus 11. And we can write it as r plus 11 all to the power of 2. Okay, that is a good factoring method. Let's now look at another one. Factor x squared plus 11x minus 210. Well, what do you see here? The first thing to notice, you must notice that the last term is negative. The last term is negative. If the last term is negative, the only way to factor a negative number is a positive number times a negative number. Alright? You know, once you are familiar with numbers, you can actually see it right there. Can I just show that to you? Look at this. 210 is 21 times 10. See, look at the two factors I picked, 21 and 10. 21 times 10 is 210. Now, that means one of them must be positive, the other must be negative. Okay, let me write that down and I want you to think about it. So I'm going to say 210 is 21 times 10. 21 is one factor, 10 is the other factor. But we now look for the sign. We know that this is negative 210. That means one factor, one of this must be positive and the other negative. How do you decide which is positive and which is negative? Now look at this. The middle term is positive. That means when you finally add, you must get a positive result. Now, when two numbers are added, the only way to get a positive result is that the bigger number must be positive. So, I'm going to now say that negative 210 is positive 21 multiplied by negative 10. You see? Negative 210, the last term, is positive 21 times negative 10. Why did I choose that? Because if you add positive 21 to negative 10, you get positive 11. You see that? And that is the guiding principle you must use. Okay. We start by factoring the first term. X squared can only be factored as x times x. Write them side by side as usual. And now, how do we factor negative 210? The last term is negative and the middle term is positive. That means the last term should have a positive factor and a negative factor. And because the middle term is positive, the positive factor must be the bigger number and the negative factor must be the smaller number. So we have negative 210 equal to positive 21 times negative 10. Now write that below positive 21 below 1x and negative 10 below the other x. Now multiply diagonally. Negative 10 times x is negative 10x. 21 times x is 21x. What do you get if you add them? Adding gives you 21x minus 10x is 11x. And that is our middle term. Always remember that test must be done. When you arrange your factors, multiply diagonally and add, you must get the middle term. And once you get the middle term, you know that these are placed in their proper places. And what all you need to do is pick your factors vertically. Tell me, what is the first factor? The first factor is x plus 21. What is the second factor? The second factor is x minus 10. There you are. So the first factor is x plus 21 and the second factor is x minus 10. Therefore, this trinomial x squared plus 11x minus 210 is factored as x plus 21 multiplied by x minus 10. I'm sure you now like factoring trinomials, don't you? It's a very interesting way of factoring trinomials. All right, let's do this now. X squared plus 5xa plus 4a squared. Well, this time, really you have no trouble because all the signs are positive. That means all our factors will be positive. All right, let's now talk about it. How do we start? Starting is factor the first term. And there is only one way to factor x squared. What is that? X times x. All right, write these side by side. Now, how do we factor 4a squared? There are many ways to factor 4a squared. You see, 4a squared can be factored as 4a times a is one way. I can also factor it as 2a times 2a. Is that right? Yes. I can factor 4a squared as 2a times 2a. All right. Let's try it out here. If 2a times 2a, write 2a below the x and 2a below the other x. Now, watch, you can do it mentally. Multiply 2a times x is 2xa. Added to 2xa gives you only 4xa, but our middle term is 5xa. So obviously this doesn't work. You cannot factor 4a squared as 2a times 2a in this case. Why? Because multiplying diagonally and adding does not give you the middle term 5xa. That means obviously we need to now try the other one. Okay, let's try that one. 4a squared is factored as 4a times a, both positive. And we write 4a, positive 4a, and positive a. So, positive 4a squared is positive 4a times positive a. Now, do you understand the trial and error method now? Alright, multiply diagonally. A times x is ax. Now, remember that xa and ax are the same thing. And 4a times x is 4ax. Adding them together gives you ax plus 4ax is 5ax. 5ax is the same as 5xa. We got the middle term. And therefore, we now pick the factors vertically. What is the first factor? The first factor is x plus 4a. X plus 4a is the first factor. What is the second factor? X plus a is the second factor. And so, x squared plus 5xa plus 4a squared is factored as x plus 4a times x plus a. Alright, let's do another one. Factor negative 3x squared minus 12x minus 9. Now, remember the golden rule of factoring? What is the golden rule of factoring I gave you in the beginning? Always look for anything that can be found as the common factor in all the terms. Is there a number that is common to all these three terms? Negative 3x squared, negative 12x, minus 9. Can you find a common factor which can be pulled out? I can. That number is negative 3. Negative 3. I can pull out a negative 3 from here, a negative 3 from the middle term, and a negative 3 from the last term. How does it look? We can now write this as negative 3x squared minus 12x minus 9 is the same as negative 3 times x squared plus 4x plus 3. I hope you understand that. Because, alright, negative 3x squared is negative 3 times positive x squared, and negative 12x is negative 3 times positive 4x, and negative 9 is negative 3 times positive 3. You see that? So we took the negative 3 as common, and what is remaining is x squared plus 4x plus 3. And that is the first step. Pull out the common factor. Now, once the common factor is pulled out, what is remaining in the parentheses is a trinomial. And now we factor that trinomial using the rules we learned earlier. Now, you know x squared can be factored as x times x. And positive 3, there is only one way to factor that positive 3. Because the middle term is positive, positive 3 can be factored as 3 positive 3 times positive 1. Alright, we write x and x side by side. Write positive 3 and positive 1 below the x's. Alright, multiply diagonally. We get positive 1 times x is x. Positive 3 times x is 3x. Adding them together gives you 4x, the middle term. That means this trinomial is now factored. What are the factors of that trinomial? The factors of this trinomial are x plus 3 is the first factor, and x plus 1 is the second factor. That means our original expression for factoring is negative 3x squared minus 12x minus 9. You remember we pulled out the common factor. That will be negative 3 times x squared plus 4x plus 3. And we now factored this trinomial as x plus 3 times x plus 1. So that will be now negative 3 times x plus 3 times x plus 1. There are 3 factors for that polynomial. I hope you understand that method. Always look for common factor that can be pulled out before you apply any other method of factoring. Alright, try another one. Okay, try this. Factor a cube b plus 2a squared b minus 35ab. Now what do you notice? The first thing to do is to pull out common factor. What is common in all these 3 terms? Can you figure out? It's very simple. AB is a common factor. Alright, let's pull out AB from each of these. When AB is pulled out from the first term, you are left with an a squared. Plus, when AB is pulled out, you are left with a positive 2a. And when AB is pulled out, the last term is negative 35. Do you understand that? We pulled out an AB as common factor, leaving an a squared in the first term. Look at this. AB times a squared is a cube b. AB times 2a is 2a squared b. And AB times negative 35 is minus 35ab. Okay, so we have now pulled out the common factor, that is AB. And now you have a trinomial. A squared plus 2a minus 35. Let's factor that trinomial. Alright, factor the first term of the trinomial. A squared equal to a times a. Let's write them side by side, a and a. Now, I want to see how many of you can actually do this. The last term is negative and the middle term is positive. Can you give me two numbers when multiplied together gives you negative 35 and when added gives you a positive 2? Is it difficult to find those two numbers? Two numbers when multiplied will give you negative 35. Obviously, it means one number must be positive, the other number must be negative. But when you add them together, you must get a positive 2. How about positive 7 and negative 5? Right? Negative 35, factor it as positive 7 times negative 5. Why did I choose 7 to be positive? Because 7 is the bigger number here and I know the middle term is positive. That's why I chose 7 to be positive and 5 to be negative. Alright, write them below, A and A. Let's multiply diagonally. Negative 5 times A is negative 5A. And 7 times A is positive 7A. What do you get if you add them together? Negative 5A added to 7A is 2A. And that is our middle term, positive 2A. That means now these are placed in their proper positions and they are right. How do we pick the factors of this trinomial? The first factor of that trinomial is A plus 7. The second factor of the trinomial is A minus 5. Therefore, this trinomial A squared plus 2A minus 35 is A plus 7 times A minus 5. But we are factoring this quantity. You remember, we start A cubed B plus 2A squared B minus 35AB. We factored an AB out with A squared plus 2A minus 35 inside the parenthesis, and that trinomial we factored. What are the factors of this trinomial? The factors of this trinomial are A plus 7 times A minus 5. So what are the full factoring here? That will be AB times A plus 7 times A minus 5. Okay, that's a very neat way to factor these kind of algebraic expressions. Alright, again, what is the golden rule in factoring? Begin by looking at common factors that you can pull out. And that will make a big difference in your factoring method. Let's do another one. Factor 36x squared minus 23x minus 8. Well, this is slightly different from all the factoring we did so far. Why is it different? It is different because the coefficient of x squared is no longer 1. You see, when the coefficient of the first term is 1, it is very easy to factor. But when the coefficient is not 1, you have 36x squared. It introduces a level of difficulty into this factoring. And this is what we're going to see in this question and in the next lesson. Alright? Okay. Now, there are no common factors. You don't see any common factor, do you? No. Alright, first we start by factoring 36x squared. Well, you know 36x squared can be factored in many ways. Now what are some of the ways 36x squared can be factored? I can write it like this. 36x squared is 12x times 3x, that is one way. 9x times 4x, another way. Well, 18x times 2x, another way. Well, I can also write it as negative 9x times negative 4x. There are many ways of factoring 36x squared, and this is what going to introduce the difficulty level in factoring expressions like this. Well, the guiding principle there, you know that you need to follow a trial and error method. The guiding principle is choose the middle level factors. You see, 9x and 4x seems to be more reasonable. So we start by looking and picking that. Alright, so we factored 36x squared as 9x times 4x. Now what do you do with these factors? Write them side by side like this, 9x, 4x. This is for us to do our test. Okay, now you need to factor negative 8. When the last term is negative, the only way to factor a negative number is a positive number times a negative number. Well, how do we factor that? I have done it for you here. Negative 8 can be factored as negative 8 times positive 1. There are many ways to do that. And this is where the trial and error comes in, and your familiarity with numbers. Alright, now what do we do? Now where do I write the negative 8? Do I write it below 9 or do I write it below 4x? Well, you need to do it by trial and error. Place negative 8 below 9x and positive 1 below 4x. Now what made me do that? It is my eye on the middle term. Why? When you multiply diagonally and add, you must get the middle term. Now that also tells me that when you multiply, whatever number becomes big, that must be made negative. Then only adding will produce a negative result. The middle term is negative. Now look at the way I placed the negative 8. Negative 8 times 4 is negative 32. Positive 1 times 9 is positive 9. Adding positive 9 to negative 32 gives me negative 23. You see, this is where your eye must be. So try this. If one doesn't work, strike it off and try another one. That is the way to proceed in this case. Alright. Now multiply diagonally. Positive 1 multiplied by 9 multiplied by 9x is positive 9x. Negative 8 multiplied by 4x is negative 32x. Alright, add them together, what do you get? Negative 23x. And that is the middle term. So, when you are not sure, try all possible combinations until you satisfy this test. Once this test is done and multiplying diagonally and adding gives you the middle term, then you are home. What all you need to do is pick your factors now vertically. The first factor is 9x minus 8 and the second factor is 4x plus 1. And therefore 36x squared minus 23x minus 8 is 9x minus 8 times 4x plus 1. I know this is a little tedious for you, but you will get used to it as we go on. And we're going to practice with more of this. Alright, let's look at this one. Factor 8b cubed c squared plus 28b squared c cubed plus 12bc to the power 4. What is it that we need to know in factoring a trinomial expression like this? Alright, can you talk about that in your mind? The first thing to look for are common factors. Can you figure out the common factors in these three terms? Well, you must look for common factors in a systematic way. How? Look at the numbers. 8, 28, 12. Can you figure out a common factor in those three numbers? 8, 28 and 12. What is the greatest common factor in those three numbers? Isn't that 2? Yes. So 2 is a common factor. How about 4? Well, I think 8 can be divided by 4. 28 can be divided by 4. 12 also can be divided by 4. So 4 is the greatest common factor and not 2. 2 is a common factor but not the greatest. Alright, so 4 is the greatest common factor. Look at b cubed, b squared, b. What is the common factor for b cubed, b squared and b? That would be b. How about c squared, c cubed and c to the power 4? What is the common factor there? That is c squared. So what is the greatest common factor in the three terms? That will be 4bc squared. 4bc squared is the common factor. Alright? If you remove 4bc squared from the first term, what is left there? Factoring out 4 from the 8 will leave a 2. b cubed, factoring out b will leave a b squared. C squared is factored out, so that will be a 2b squared in the first term. Alright, can you think about what will be left in the second term? After 4 is factored out, you have a 7. After b is factored out, you have a b. And after c squared is factored out, you have a c. So that will be 7bc is left in the middle term. And what is left in the last term? After 4 is factored out, you have a 3 left here. b is factored out. After c squared is factored out of c to the 4, you have a c squared. So what is left there will be 3c squared. Let's write that. 8b cubed c squared plus 28b squared c cubed plus 12bc to the power 4. Factoring out 4bc squared will leave a 2b squared in the first term plus a 7bc, the middle term, plus 3c squared, the last term. I hope you understand how this is done. Now you have a trinomial in its simplest form. You can factor this. What is the first step of factoring a trinomial? Factor the first term, 2b squared. How do we factor 2b squared? You can only factor 2b squared in one way, 2b multiplied by b. Now write that side by side, 2b multiplied by b. And now we factor the last term, 3c squared. Now, because all these terms are positive, what all you need to figure out is look at the way I'm going to look at it. 3 times 2 is 6. And 6 added to 1 is 7. That means I'm going to factor 3c squared as positive 3c times positive c. And now, where do I write this positive 3c? I must write this positive 3c in such a position so as it will multiply with 2b, giving me 3c times 2b as 6bc. I'm aiming towards 7bc. So I write my 3c here below that b, so that diagonal multiplication will multiply the 3 with the 2 and positive c below 2b. Alright, let's multiply diagonally. 3c multiplied by 2b is 6bc, and the c multiplied by b is 1bc. Now, do you understand the rationale of my argument? 3 times 2 is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. 6bc added to 1bc is 7bc. That is our middle term. That means these are now placed in their proper places. What are the factors of this trinomial? The first factor is 2b plus c, and the second factor is b plus 3c. And therefore, this expression 4b squared times 2b squared plus 7bc plus 3c squared is factored as 4bc squared times 2b plus c times b plus 3c. Now, this has been a fairly involved one. If you understood this, if you can do this, you are doing very well. Okay, if you have a little problem, go back and watch this one more time and learn how to do factoring like this. Alright, we're going to do just one more to finish this lesson. Factor 3b squared c squared minus bc minus 2. Okay, what's the first thing to do? Are there any common factors that you can pull out? There are no common factors in those 3 terms. Well, therefore, we start from step 1, factor the first term. 3b squared c squared can be factored as 3bc times bc. There's no other way to factor it. Alright, write 3bc and bc side by side. Okay, we now need to factor negative 2. Negative 2. Now, a negative number can be factored only as a positive number times a negative number. And now, when you add, you must get a negative bc. Now look at the way I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to say I've got a 3 in the factors of the first term and a 2 in the last term, and I know 3 minus 2 is 1. I need to produce a 1 bc with a negative sign in the middle. So what do? I factor negative 2 as, look at the way I'm going to do it, negative 2 as positive 2 times negative 1. Why did I do that? So that I will place this negative 1 so that it will multiply with this 3bc, giving me negative 3bc. And I will place this 2 so that it will multiply with this bc, giving me a positive 2bc. You see, negative 3bc added to positive 2bc will give me a negative bc. Did you understand that? So, where do I place this positive 2? I will place it below 3bc so that that positive 2 will be multiplied by BC. I will place the negative 1 below C so that that negative 1 will be multiplied by 3BC, giving me a negative 3BC then. So multiplying diagonally, negative 1 times 3BC is negative 3BC, and positive 2 times BC is plus 2BC. Negative 3BC plus 2BC is negative BC. We got the middle term. Alright, now we have the test is done, everything is placed in its proper place. How do we pick the factors? The factors are 3BC plus 2 is the first factor, and BC minus 1, yes, BC minus 1 is the second factor. Therefore, this trinomial expression 3b squared c squared minus BC minus 2 is factored as 3BC plus 2 times BC minus 1. Now, we have done a number of varieties of trinomial factoring now in this lesson. I will extend this in the next lesson. We will practice with more in the next lesson. That indicates how important the skill of factoring is. We will be using this skill of factoring in Unit 5 and also in Unit 6. Very important skills. So spend some time and learn this. I will get back to you with the next lesson that is more on factoring these expressions a little later. All right?